hope we get out of here. You in the shower sing.
This is Dystopia Now, a show where a comedian and an academic explore the philosophies and religions of Silicon Valley and the tech billionaires shaping our country, our world, and our future. I'm Kate Willett, and my co-host is Emil Torres.
That's when it suddenly hit me. Let's let the filthy billionaires all leave from Mars, 'cause we don't want them here. They steal what...
Hello, and welcome back to Dystopia Now. I am Kate Willett.
I'm Emil Torres.
And we're living in a dystopia now. Okay, so right before we started recording, Emil told me, have you heard about the shrimp? We were talking about effective altruism, and I promised that I would ask as soon as we started recording so that I could learn about this on real time. For listeners who may be just joining us for the first time, EA stands for Effective Altruism, and we've done several episodes on this Silicon Valley cult. And we were just talking about how, in addition to some of the kind of weirder stuff that they believe about, preventing robots from killing us all and stuff, they're also a lot of the times a vegetarian. And I was trying to get into why that might be so important. And so what does shrimp have to do with this?
So as I think a lot of people would say that effective altruism, so that's the EA in this acronym TESCRIL that keeps coming up in our podcast episodes. From a distance, a lot of what EA is interested in looks pretty good. It looks pretty appealing. And over again, there are instances of people. I've seen this happen. I'm one of these individuals who exemplifies this kind of cycle where you find EA to be really appealing, you get involved, and then once you're there, you look around and go like, oh, this is not this is not my epistemic or moral community. Like, the community is really weird. It's really authoritarian. Some of the causes, when you look at the details, are really weird. They're into animal welfare. That's great. Eliminating factory farming, I am passionately for that. I myself am a vegetarian. I'm not, a strong prescriptivist about that.
Yeah, same. And I am not against vegetarianism at all. I'm not a vegetarian, but I try to live my life in such a way where I eat as little meat as possible. And then if I'm grabbing something on the go and I don't have other options, I'm a freegan. But I lean it towards vegetarianism whenever possible. And I do think that is a very noble thing to do, both for our planet and because animals are beings that we should take care of. So I just want to say we're not making fun of vegetarians. Both of us are on that same page.
Yeah, absolutely. And so consistent with this interest in animal welfare, there is this project called the Shrimp Welfare Project.
So they don't believe in welfare for people, but they do believe in welfare for shrimp.
Well, for them, it's all a numbers game. So they would say that they're not anthropocentric. Not about humans are the only beings that matter. They are instead sentient-centric. So what matters is sentience, or really it's the ability to have conscious experiences, in particular of suffering or well-being. So the numbers game goes as follows. By virtue of the fact that there are so many shrimp that are caught and then killed, even if it's the case that shrimp have a very small capacity to experience suffering, the total amount of suffering could be really, really large. And so that is what inspired this shrimp welfare project that has gained a bit of attention within. There are lots of EAs who find it inspiring, but it's also been a target of ridicule for obvious reasons by people who are critical of EA. So that's what shrimp has to do with it.
It's interesting because I was thinking about a lot of these tech philosophies. I don't know what I want to call them philosophies, ideologies, I guess is maybe a better word because some of them aren't too silly to be philosophies. And to me, as a person who's not a philosopher like you, a lot of them sound kind of like utilitarianism. And yeah, I guess since I'm talking to a philosopher, what is the difference? How is this not how is EA not just an update on utilitarianism? What's actually the difference there?
Yeah, so there was a talk given a few years ago by Toby Ord, who's one of the co-founders of Effective Altruism.
And I think I found out he's an advisor to the WTO or something like that, isn't he?
he has contributed to, so I think that is true.
Yeah.
And he's also contributed to a whole bunch of like high level government reports that were put out by the United Nations, the UK government, and so on. I mean, these people are pretty influential. I mean, they have connections.
Well, and influential and also neoliberal. Like, it's a lot of the things that they do, it seems like it's kind of taking neoliberalism and trying to create a philosophical or moral justification for this type of political economy that we have already. Yeah.
I mean, I think I pointed out in a previous podcast that historically speaking, utilitarianism and industrial capitalism in particular emerged right around the same time. And I don't think that is a coincidence. I have not ever actually looked into this in detail, but my guess is that the fact that their respective emergences coincided is just not an accident, because, capitalism is all about maximizing something, which is profit. Utilitarianism is also all about maximizing something, which is so-called intrinsic value, whatever you take that to be. Utilitarians say it's well-being, which itself could have different interpretations. The most straightforward interpretation of well-being as intrinsic value is just happiness.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like pleasurable experiences. And so both are just ultimately about like maximizing something. Utilitarianism has a broader scope. It's about value in general, not just profit in particular. And I mean, the connection between effective altruism and utilitarianism. So actually, I was mentioning this article, this talk that Toby Ord gave years ago, where he explicitly noted that the origins of effective altruism go back to utilitarianism, the Enlightenment, and the scientific revolution.
Okay, so it's like he acknowledges the relationship there, but they're like trying to bring science into it in some way, like really sciencey utilitarianism.
So I would say effective altruism is enormously influenced by utilitarianism, but there is a difference, or at least potentially there's a difference, which is that utilitarianism says the only thing that matters morally is maximizing value. And the way a lot of EAs manage to dodge the accusation that they're just utilitarians is they say, well, we are actually open to the possibility that there are other things that matter aside from just maximizing value. So, for example, if somebody holds a deontological view according to which murder is always wrong, then they can, as soon as they incorporate that into their utilitarian type view, then technically they're not utilitarian anymore.
Okay.
Right? And so a lot of EAs will say, okay, well, like in the aftermath of the collapse of FTX, Toby Ord said that Sam Bankman-Fried was not paying attention and he was not being a good effective altruist because effective altruists like Ord have argued that there are actually some constraints on our behavior, some things you should not do, like commit fraud.
Right. Whereas a traditional utilitarian would say, well, it depends what happens if the fraud, like what's the consequence of the fraud?
Exactly. It depends entirely on the consequences if you're utilitarian. So there's nothing intrinsically wrong about any particular act, including murder or fraud or lying, cheating, and so on. It all depends on the outcome. And there are nuances to add. If there are any philosophers listening, there are lots of nuances and qualifications there. But that's the general idea. And so, one way that they sort of wiggle out of the accusation that they're just utilitarians is by saying, well, we're also open to these other, constraints, moral constraints on our behavior. These are essentially constraints on maximizing value.
It also strikes me like a traditional utilitarian might look at something like the sort of EA view that one of the best things you can do in your life is like become a hedge fund manager so that you can have lots of money to donate. Like it seems like more kind of pure utilitarianism would ask you to look at the consequences of being a hedge fund manager and see if maybe it was actually more harmful than you were actually making up for by donating. I don't know. I'm not a philosopher. What do you think about this? Yeah.
So Will MacAskill, who along with Toby Ord was the one who founded Effective Altruism, he argued in a paper that has been pretty heavily criticized, at least by some people in my circle, in my camp, for basically making the argument for this idea of earn to give, right? If there is so MacAskill literally argues that if you can make more money by pursuing a lucrative career and then take that money and donate it to charity, you might ultimately be able to do more good from this kind of consequentialist or utilitarian perspective than if you went and worked for a nonprofit. After all, if you ended up on Wall Street and you're making $1 million a year, you can take 90% of that money, give it to the nonprofit you're going to work for. And that nonprofit then can hire like 10 people rather than just one person to fill the job that you might have been considering taking. And so Pascal even uses this term, immoral organizations.
Immoral organizations. Okay.
Yeah. And the example he gives is petrochemical companies.
Okay.
So you might actually be able to do more good by working for these immoral organizations, including like companies on Wall Street. There are a bunch of EAs who have gone to work for Jane Street Capital. There's a guy named Matthew Wage. I believe he was the first one within the fledgling EA community many years ago who went to work on Jane Street Capital so that he could donate more money to charity. And then Sam Bankman-Fried worked for the same firm, as well as Bankman-Fried's brother, Gabe Bankman-Fried, who we actually mentioned on the previous podcast because he was the one who was in conversation with other people in the community about buying the island nation of Nauru so that they could build an EA bunker on it.
Oh my God, I literally would just be like, drop the bombs directly on me before I have to go in that EA bunker. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure this isn't covering any new grounds, but I mean, it's all just very convenient reasoning, right? Like, oh yeah, having this job where I'm actually Satan, I'm actually doing good. It's like this really complex form of self-justification. And I'm like, you can just keep this between you and yourself. You don't have to make this into a whole philosophy. Like, yeah, man, I justify my own bullshit all the time. But like the sort of narcissism of being like, this needs to be a thing for the entire world to get behind.
Yeah, not only do these people go to work at Jane Street Capital or whatever, but then they kind of turn around and peer down their nose at other people. I'm working at Jane Street Capital, making $1 million a year or whatever. I'm giving more to charity then and saving more lives than you people who, for example, are working at a nonprofit.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, it's also just so, like, the fact that everything has to be mathematical and that they think that, you know, this basically that there is a way to like mathematically determine the value of your donation. Like, I'll tell you, like, I donate or pay dues to DSA, and I just made a decision to raise my dues, like from an EA perspective.
What is DSA?
Democratic Socialists of America.
Okay,
it's a political organization. So the dues goes towards, you know, helping out with socialist campaigns, running the organization. And it's a strategy of just basically trying to move our politics in the country over time. But there's no direct like results. Like it's not a malaria net. I'm not opposed to donating for malaria nets, but like it seems like an effective altruist would consider like the donation that I choose to make to like a political organization to be fairly worthless because it doesn't have this quantifiable impact. Even if I believe that it does have an impact over time that may lead to a more fair society overall, they're not engaging on that kind of social change level. Yeah,
I think that's exactly right. There was a edited volume that was published just a few years ago. Alice Crary was one of the editors, and it's called The Good It Promises, the Harm It Does. I think it's the best lengthy, sustained critique of effective altruism so far published. And one of the ideas that is foregrounded in this book is that there's a very strong quantitative bias in the metrics that EA uses to determine the efficacy of certain charitable causes or certain charitable interventions. And that bias means that there are all sorts of potentially really good ways of improving the world that end up just getting completely left out. They're just not commensurable with the sort of metrics that EA uses. I had mentioned on a previous podcast this guy in Uganda named Anthony Kalulu, who runs I think it's called the Ugandan Community Farm. It's a grassroots organization. So a few years ago, he published what I consider to be an excellent, really compelling critique of EA. And he basically said, as I think I'd mentioned before, that EA makes him feel more hopeless than traditional philanthropy does. Because EA adopts these metrics, grassroots organizations like his are just never, ever going to make the cut. They're not even going to be considered.
There's also things that have a lot of benefit to a society that are not going to be mathematically quantifiable. Like, let's say you build a community center, like in a neighborhood where there isn't a space for kids to hang out and have a good time. It's a very wonderful thing to do, but it's not directly saving a life, but it's enhancing a life. It's, you know, giving people an opportunity to be with one another. You know, it may be an issue of like racial justice. It may be an issue of like environmental justice. Like there's a lot of different things that it could be, housing justice, but it's not just this like math problem.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, issues of community, justice, and so on, these are just not part of the equation that effective altruists use. And so you're completely right. There could be enormous benefits to building like a community center that brings people together. And this could have like ripple effects that last for generations, that build community, bring people together, and so on. But it's just not, it counts for nothing within the EA framework.
Yeah, and I think to me, the fact that so many people in the EA movement sort of readily accept this framework, I think it is sort of emblematic of the type of people who get attracted to this, which are, sorry, but like low emotional intelligence people.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the startup boom in San Francisco in the 2010s, and I think Sam Altman made a fuck ton of money during this time. But basically, it was super easy to get money for your startup because interest rates were so low, and people would come up with these kinds of ideas that get made fun of now, like Uber for cookies or whatever. But people were just getting all this money for these like truly dumbass startups that had no value to society and becoming very rich in some cases without ever doing anything that contributed to humanity. And I think that a lot of these men are very young, became convinced that they were geniuses. And that is why they have all this wealth. And to me, that just impacts so much of like why this is the way it is because these people are convinced that they are the smartest people in the world.
Yeah.
Can I read you something? So basically, I saw this thing on Twitter that it was a blog post written on Slate Star Codex. I'm actually not sure if it was written by Scott Alexander himself or someone else who he was publishing or interviewing. I don't know. But like to me, it almost doesn't matter because it's just emblematic of the vibe of that whole blog. And the blog post was called Twilight of the Edgelords. And there's this guy who I'm assuming is like a rationalist type of person. We wanted to be able to discuss common sense facts about sex and race without getting called Hitler. So we cheered as Musk dismantled the censorship industrial complex. And the next day, every third tweet was something like, quote, the Jews are forcing antibiotics on you to keep you weak, unquote. And God help me, but lots of people are starting to believe it. We wanted to be able to prevent biological men with testosterone-boosted muscles from competing in women's sports leagues. And somehow that morphed into a world where whenever someone with more subtlety than Attila the Hun tries to stake out a position on anything, roving bands of dead-eyed reply guys interject, how many genders are there? Bet you can't answer that. We wanted to believe that Silicon Valley in the power of smart techno-optimists to do good and change the world. Instead, those people turned on us and helped elect a lunatic in exchange for using his taxpayer money to pump their crypto bags. The guy I thought of as a hero and inspiration through my 20s, reduced to a cat turd retweet bot. And I'm like, I mean, to me, it's just so funny that, like, in a really dark way that these kind of edgelord rationalist type of people, like, they think they're so smart, but they can't make the connection between the fact that it was so important to them to talk about race science that they were willing to vote for Trump and that they have some responsibility in this situation. And that's a fucking weird to be so important to you, you know?
Yeah, that's appalling. It reminds me a bit of the CEOs who, after Trump was elected, were gleefully shouting, now we can say the P word and the R word. And
yeah,
then some of those same... Right.
Like, I mean...
Well, now comedy is legal again. So you can say what you want. Cancel culture is over. But those same people now are like, oh my God, like, what have we done? Trump is destroying the economy. And it's just such a pathetic own goal, etc.
Yeah, I've been noticing how much like these kinds of scientific racism ideas are actually sort of coming out into the open now. Like that woman, Ella, was talking about it. And like even Richard Hanania was like, hey, you're taking this a little too far. Some people who are into this are really bad people. And I'm like, I don't know if you believe that. But it just... I mean, I was listening to this Tyler Cohen interview with Ezra Klein, and they were talking about natalism, and Tyler Cohen is basically like, well, birth subsidies aren't really going to work, but maybe one thing that would work is going back to a conservative society where women have to have 5 kids. And Ezra Klein he's kind of like, oh, that's one idea. I mean, he said that Klein said he's very into the birth rate. He's very obsessed with it, but that he doesn't ultimately think it's going to work to set women back for so long, but he was entertaining the conversation, I guess, is my point. And I do feel like some of these weirdo ideas, this natalism, this scientific racism, the human biodiversity shit, it's getting kind of a lot of engagement from centrists right now, especially these like tech centrists who are like, oh yeah, like who among us doesn't discuss race and IQ with our friends? I'm like, I never do. It's not a thing in my social group. Like, it's not, if someone brought that up at any party I was at, it would be extremely uncomfortable and people would probably leave the party. Like, this is emblematic of you and your social circle that you think that this shit is normal.
We've talked before about the eternal return of eugenics.
Yeah.
How this is an idea that just won't die. Perhaps I have been mostly embedded in like academic circles. And so perhaps over the past like 20 years, and even when I wasn't a grad student, just an independent scholar. And so perhaps I've been exposed to topics of conversation that most people haven't. I mention this because I definitely knew people. But back when I lived in Durham, North Carolina, I knew some people who were either students or had just graduated from Duke University. One in particular stands out in my memory. Him and his wife had a kid. We got to talking about it, and his main reason that he said explicitly to me for having a kid was that he thought his IQ was really high and he has really good genes and he wanted to pass them on to the next generation. And he's one of probably 5 people I've known over the years, some of whom I considered friends. I didn't know they had these views until they actually had kids. And they were like, yeah, I just think it's really important that I pass my genes on to the next generation because we want to make sure that the average intelligence, quote unquote, of humanity doesn't decline. And so I'm going to be part of the solution by having kids. So, I mean, this idea is like, historically, it's been on both the far right, the fascist right, but also it's been embraced by people on the progressive left. And it's only over the past few decades that progressives have started to become really critical of it. But you can see it now being embraced by centrists, like you're saying.
I was reading about that guy, Peter Singer, who is, he's an EA person too, a philosopher.
He is, and a utilitarian.
Yeah, and it sounds like he has full-on endorsed eugenics. It sounds like he has made a full-throated defense of, like, if you have twins and one is disabled, you could kill the disabled twin. Like, it sounds like he's just gone fully for it. Am I getting this right?
Yeah. He co-authored with a whole bunch of other people, including questionable figures, if I remember correctly, like Jonathan Anomaly. That's his actual name. They all co-authored this article defending eugenics. And Peter Singer, back in the mid-1980s, also co-authored a book which was titled Should the Baby Live? And they explicitly say in the introduction that we're going to defend a thesis that a lot of people are going to find quite alarming, which is that we believe that some infants should be killed. In particular, infants who have certain congenital mental cognitive disabilities. And what part of their argument, I mean, it's fundamentally utilitarian, but part of it then is couched in terms of the societal burden that these individuals would.
So, I mean, that's Hitler's argument.
I mean, it's not far. I mean, it's all eugenics.
Yeah.
And from Singer's utilitarian view, infanticide makes perfectly good sense. Like I said before, there's nothing intrinsically wrong about any act, right? Including infanticide. So it all depends on what the consequences are. And so from Singer's perspective, like, okay, there's some individuals who have such severe disabilities that they have an outsized burden on society. They require caretakers and so on. And hence, things would just be better off overall. Value would be maximized if we eliminated these individuals. And that contrasts with a perspective that I'm sympathetic with, which takes seriously the value of individuals, even if they have disabilities of certain sorts. But that idea is not part of Singer's moral vocabulary.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, this is all just, these people are just really disturbed, and we're only talking about it because they have so much power, which is, a point that you've made many times.
It's worth emphasizing. So first of all, as I've said before, EA and utilitarianism in general, I mean, it reduces the domain of morality to a branch of economics.
Yeah.
Right? And a good way to think about this is that they understand ethics in very impersonal terms, right? Numbers are impersonal. It's just about, crunching the numbers, maximizing value, and so on. But there is a radically different approach to ethics, which is personal, which takes seriously this idea that a significant part of morality has to do with our interpersonal connections. So this ties into what you had brought up before about charitable projects that focus on building building community, right? That's like, it's hard to quantify, so it doesn't fit easily into a kind of utilitarian calculus. But, if you have a more personal kind of approach to ethics, which I do, things like community, those qualitative benefits that as a result can't be, quantified, that's an important aspect of morality.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like there are some things that it does depend on the relationship and the situation. If someone calls you and they're like, hey, I really need help changing my tire right now, and you're like, oh, I'm really sorry, I don't have time. If that person is an acquaintance of yours, maybe that's fine. If it's your pregnant wife, maybe that's fucked up.
Yeah,
It depends on the situation. Like, it's not, relationships inform whether something is an asshole move or not, I guess, is the philosophical way of saying it.
So imagine a situation where you're standing next to a lake,
Yeah.
and there are two children that are equidistant from you.
Yeah.
Both are drowning.
This is
And
Peter Singer's example, right? Or
so
no?
it's drawing for it's similar
Yeah.
in certain respects, but I think the point of this thought experiment is to highlight how strange the implications of impersonal ethics can be. So imagine there are these two children that are drowning. One of them is your child, or if you don't have a child, like in my case, it's like my sibling's child or something like that. The other one is a complete stranger. So, and let's further say that you're only able to save one child for whatever reason, right? So then the question is, which child do you save? And overwhelmingly, most people are going to say, well, I'm going to save my child or the child of my kin, right? And there's something weird about like going out and saving the stranger's child, even though that would still be a really, really good thing to do.
Yeah.
But at the cost of neglecting my own child, it feels really weird. If you're a utilitarian and you have this genuinely impersonal, sort of impartial approach to ethics, then deciding which child to save is a matter of flipping a coin, right? There's no difference between the two.
I mean, it's interesting though, because the utilitarian in that situation is still going to save their own child. They're not, unless the person is a literal sociopath. If that child is like drowning and yelling, "Daddy," you're like designed to go save your child, and it's kind of lying to yourself to think that that's not how you would react in that situation. So it is sort of interesting that they want to like sort of impose this framework that has nothing to do with how human beings actually are. I mean, what I would do in that situation is I would like, try really, really hard to save both children, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not realistic that people are not going to like save their child.
I think if Singer was in this situation and he saved his own child, he would get back to the shore and just castigate himself for being a bad utilitarian. Like he'd be really upset. Yeah.
That's so sociopathic.
I mean, Derek Parfit, who was very influential among utilitarians, and his ethical theory was very much shaped by utilitarianism. I mentioned before in a previous podcast, he heard that there was this video of Hitler doing a little jig after France fell. And he said, well, at least something good came of the fall of France. Like, at least somebody was happy. Because a world in which France falls and Hitler isn't happy, that is a worse world than one in which France falls and Hitler is happy.
I think it's really messed up, too, because these people are increasingly tech billionaires, are influencing real-world policy making a lot. One area that I've talked about that I think about a lot is housing. And they're very into housing politics. And that utilitarianism really comes through in their housing politics. Like, okay, let's say there's a building that has 50 people and they're all low-income families in there. And to tear down that building and replace it with 51 23-year-old super rich white guys in little studio apartments, that's more moral because of the 51. Even though, like, to someone like me, I'd be like, yeah, but those people have so many other options for where to live. Whereas, like, these people that lost their home, like, they might be homeless. Like, they're not going to be able to find something else. So that has to be taken into consideration. But it's just with stuff, Tyler Cohen on that podcast with Ezra Klein. And Tyler Cohen is this Mercatus Center economist that I know is really close to Peter Thiel. Tyler Cohen was talking about how an abundance perspective on healthcare is to cut Medicare, get rid of it, and invest all of that money that we saved into like pharmaceutical development so that people who could benefit more earlier in their life, it's going to, like, in a utilitarian way, the math sort of works out. But then, of course, it's like heinous to just say, like, okay, we're not going to take care of senior citizens anymore at all. Like, it's not just about that. Like, it's fucked up to like completely abandon your senior citizens. And it's just these people sort of never arrive to the like, hey, that's fucked up level.
Yeah.
It was funny because he was talking to Ezra Klein about it, and maybe we'll play the clip. But it was just like he was like, Ezra, like why don't you believe in this? Like, and Ezra Klein's just like, I don't know, it doesn't fit my politics, right? Like he sort of couldn't make the argument because he himself is so steeped in this like free market utilitarian logic. But there is a natural sort of point where for him as a liberal, he's like, well, I'm not going to take this to sociopathic ends, but everybody has a different definition of where that sort of sociopath point comes in, you know? Like it's probably not every effective altruist who would really praise Hitler or be happy that Hitler did dance. Like probably most people would not say that, at least publicly. But
publicly, yeah.
Yeah, you're like, I've met these people, Kate. You don't know them. I mean, so the main subject for our episode today, we want to get back to.
We're 40 minutes in, but we're getting to the main topic.
Yeah, well, or at least, well, maybe this had two main topics. We wanted to finish up with Sam Altman, or at least finish up with Sam Altman for now. I do want to take a moment to thank our Patreon supporters. We are now at 52 paid subscribers, which I'm just so appreciative for. We're very, very close to being able to hire an editor for this podcast, which happened faster even than I was hoping. So if you are thinking about becoming a subscriber, that would be so awesome. Right now, that's Marianne D. Wolf, Leigh Elliott, Sprague Garden, Heather Hollick, Ryan Dan, Nick Abigail, Andrew Tenenbaum, Andrew Koutrakis, Andrew Jensen, Danielle DeFries, Shaban Shea, Alexander Poilisher, Joseph Bania, Stuart Slater, Vivek Dandekar, KMF, Noah Chachi Uday, Joseph Stevenson, Kev Bednards, Eddie Nico, Brianna Chang, AJ Macerna, Matt, John Johnson, Remelt Ellen, Blaine, Snuffleupagus, Vigard,
Snuffleupagus.
Yeah. Big Bird has not subscribed yet. Kayla, Molly, Casey Lipkin. 2 pages now. Thank you so much. So last week we talked about Sam Altman and his AI doom to non-AI doom pipeline. And then we talked about his like weird eyeball scanning thing that he thinks is going to help distribute UBI to people or let us log onto our computers. And so this week we wanted to talk about some other really strange stuff about Sam Altman, including the fact that Sam is a doomsday prepper. So yeah, I always feel a little weird when there's a doomsday preppers that are super rich. I'm like, what do you know that we don't? Yeah, like you probably have access to some sort of inside information. How come this is a thing that you're thinking about?
Is generating the risk. You know, he's the one who's actually building the machines that he himself says might destroy the world. There's a great term by a colleague of mine named Luke Kemp, who published this article in BBC Future something a while back. The term is agents of doom. And so under the umbrella of agents of doom, Kemp includes fossil fuel companies, what else? Military industrial complex and big tech. So OpenAI, and basically the idea of the agents of doom, these are the generators of global catastrophic risk. And big tech through social media, but as well as through their development of advanced AI. I mean, they are the underlying causes of this risk. So it is, I don't know, it's eyebrow raising when there's somebody who is the CEO of one of the leading agents of doom out there who's saying, oh yeah, I'll actually quote him here. He says, quote, I have guns, gold, potassium iodide, antibiotics, batteries, water, gas masks from the Israeli Defense Forces, and a big patch of land in Big Sur I can fly to.
He just has a fuck ton of money because he has invested in so many different companies. Reddit, Asana. He's an investor in Neuralink. I think he also has invested in Stripe, Airbnb. He has a nuclear fusion company. And that's another thing about Sam Altman, right? Is he's a big advocate for nuclear energy. And if I can recommend another podcast, Paris Marx, who's been a guest on this show, did a great series on AI data centers. These guys, like Sam Altman in particular, are just like, we're going to need more energy than the world is capable of, so we have to build all of this nuclear energy. I'm not even anti-nuclear. I just like want it to be safe. I just don't know about it a lot, and probably have a pretty like normie opinion about it. Like, I don't know, it could be okay. Just be careful with that one, right? Yeah. But like, it just doesn't. I don't know that I trust Sam Altman to be careful with it, and like the fact that all these billionaires like just are constantly advocating for like deregulation, cutting safety standards, cutting corners. Like, I would want the person making the safety rules about the nuclear power plant to be like an independent regulator,
yeah,
say, and not Sam Altman.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Because I'm also not opposed to nuclear power. But if Altman's involved, I don't trust Altman. I mean, maybe we'll get to some of the accusations made by employees or former employees of his that he is just a really mendacious individual. And by the way, speaking of nuclear power, I mean, Microsoft is now going to restart, I think it's three reactors.
3 Mile Islands, right?
Yeah. At 3 Mile Island, yeah, in order to power AI. Because, Microsoft's their carbon footprint has increased by 29% since 2020 due to AI. Google's has increased by 49% since 2019. All of this is because of these large language models that are powering Gemini and ChatGPT and so on. And these companies also have made pledges to go carbon neutral. So they're moving in the opposite direction. Microsoft, I think, even said that they would go carbon negative.
Yeah.
By 2030.
Yeah.
But that's almost certainly not going to happen.
Yeah, no, I think that they officially retracted the pledge to do that. They're like, oh, we were going to do this moonshot, but the moon has moved. Sorry.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think so much of this like abundance agenda stuff that we've been talking about, in addition to just sort of like technocratic policy ideas, it's also Silicon Valley's justification for why they should not have to listen to the current climate science, because it's like, oh, but don't worry, we'll have this energy in the future that'll be green, and like just ignoring the sort of like expenditure of fossil fuels that it will take to get there. I don't know a lot about climate science, but I want the climate scientists who do know deciding it, and not people who are like profit motivated, if that makes sense. I just want whoever knows the most to be the person that is contributing to the policy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, profit is indifferent to truth.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So that's the big problem with including it in the mix. And I think even worse, a lot of these AI people are promoting hype about how AI could potentially solve the climate crisis. So like, okay, this provides them a kind of quote unquote moral excuse for polluting more in the meantime. Sure, we're going to increase our carbon footprint, but it'll be worth it because we're going to develop these advanced technologies that will magically, in some way that we can't now anticipate, will show us how to actually mitigate climate change, prevent catastrophic climate change from occurring. I personally am very dubious.
Yeah, I would describe myself that way too. I think that with all these companies, they have these big promises about what they're going to do in the future, but they also don't seem to be consistent with any of the ways that they're behaving right now. It's just like, well, okay, if you really thought that like I was going to just bring us this wonderful future, you probably wouldn't be like a doomsday prepper. You probably wouldn't be, if you really think that AI is going to like make it so that none of us need jobs and everybody who does work is just so productive. Like, why is there this like insane focus on like natalism? If you really think there's going to be enough for everybody, why are you hoarding wealth? It's just like their hype is just, it's kind of sickening to me. I wanted to get into, you were telling me that you had some insight into what preceded Sam Altman's firing at OpenAI.
Yeah. So the way that OpenAI was set up, initially it had this very strong nonprofit component. Like its explicit mission was to benefit all of humanity, not maximize profit. And so then it became a capped for-profit organization, which basically means that there are people who could invest in the company and they could get some kind of return on that investment, but the return would be capped. There'd be an upper limit to the amount of money they could get back. And if there was revenue from OpenAI's products that exceeds that cap, that money is funneled then back into the nonprofit aspect. And that nonprofit consists of a board whose goal is to ensure that the AI developed by OpenAI benefits all of humanity and not just shareholders, right?
Yeah.
And over time, that this structure has shifted. I mean, now I don't know if OpenAI is now a for-profit company or they're just sort of pivoting towards a more like a for-profit approach. But basically, like there were people on the board of OpenAI, part of that nonprofit, who were sympathetic with effective altruism and long-termism. And historically, effective altruism and long-termism, they're very pro-technology, but they're anxious that if we build certain advanced technologies like artificial intelligence too quickly, we may not be able to ensure that those AI systems are sufficiently safe, right? So they're anxious about existential risk posed by artificial general intelligence or AGI. And really, they want AGI as soon as possible. They just think that AI safety research, which is focused on the question, how do we build AGI so that it doesn't destroy us, but it brings us utopia? That AI safety research needs to lead the way in front of AI capabilities research.
Yeah.
And it seems like Altman is less interested in AI safety than a lot of people in the EA AI community. And he's more focused on just the AI capabilities research. Things will probably be fine. We shouldn't really worry about existential risk. So let's just put the pedal to the metal and try to develop artificial general intelligence as soon as possible. So basically there were these people on the OpenAI's board who are techno-cautious, you might call them. And they got sort of concerned with how Altman was treating certain safety issues. So for example, there were 3 enhancements that were made to GPT-4. So it's one of the models that OpenAI has developed. GPT 3.5 is what powers ChatGPT.
Okay.
And so then one of the effective altruists on the board, named Helen Toner, asked Sam Altman whether or not these 3 enhancements to GPT-4 had been approved by the safety board, or the safety panel. And Altman told her, yes. It turns out he just lied.
Yeah.
2 of them had not been approved. So that was one instance where somebody on the board was like, Altman's not being forthcoming. He's being a little mendacious, a little misleading. But then GPT-4 was actually released as a trial in India. Nobody on the board was told about that. And it was released before all 3 enhancements had passed the safety inspection. And then even going back to 2022, it was November of 2022 that ChatGPT was first released. Nobody on the board knew about that until they checked Twitter. And Sam Altman hadn't told them. So it was just a series of incidents like that that led the board to go, okay, we can't trust Altman. We need to therefore get rid of him and replace him with someone who actually who is honest and forthright with us and can be trusted with safety issues. There are a few other cases of, there was this former employee named Todor Markov, who wrote a pretty brutal complaint of Sam Altman. And I'll just read part of it, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So he says he lost trust in OpenAI in May 2024 when he learned that OpenAI was routinely requiring departing employees to sign a general release, including a broad lifetime non-disparagement agreement.
You're never allowed to talk shit about me.
Yeah, as a precondition for keeping their vested equity. And I'm skipping ahead a little bit. At an all-hands meeting, CEO Sam Altman was asked directly whether he had known that this was a standard practice for all departing employees. At that meeting, Altman disclaimed knowledge. Immediately after the meeting, a media article was published showing official company documents with Sam Altman's signature on them, which explicitly described the requirement to sign a general release in order to retain one's vested equity in great detail. And so then this document goes on to say, this course of events led me to believe that CEO Sam Altman was a person of low integrity who had directly lied to employees about the extent of his knowledge and involvement in OpenAI's practices of forcing departing employees to sign a lifetime non-disparagement agreement.
He sounds just like such an asshole.
He really does. And I feel like all of this is just, it's not that surprising. I mean, it seems like there is a long history of this, going back of manipulation, of abusive behavior and so on, going back to Altman's childhood, because his sister, Annie Altman, has repeatedly for years argued that Sam was abusive in myriad different ways, including psychologically and sexually. So
yeah, and it's
just bad news.
We weren't there, but it would certainly be unusual for people to make a false accusation of sexual assault about their brother, right? I for sure regard that accusation with some serious weight. Her whole family, I guess, kind of came out and said that Annie Altman was lying about it and that she was a very disturbed person and stuff. But to me, reading about these families where there is someone really abusive, it's not an uncommon dynamic for the whole family to be in this sort of denial mode about the abuse and to just kind of collectively gaslight the person who is the victim.
Yeah.
So the fact that the family says it didn't happen literally means nothing to me about how I would sort of treat that. It's just looking at sort of all the behavior throughout this person's life, it does seem that there is a strong case to be made for the fact that he is not a healthy person at minimum.
Yeah. I mean, 2 points make a line. I mean, in this case, honestly, there's 100 points. And they all are right along the same line that points towards manipulative, abusive, and so on. And just over the past few years, I mean, I have befriended Annie Altman. And we've had chats over messaging platforms. I believe her. And
yeah, makes sense.
And really, all of these more recent reports from employees and former employees, people on the OpenAI's board and so on, all of that is is just perfectly consistent with some of the stuff that she says. And I also would agree with you that just because the family comes out in support of Sam, that by itself doesn't, I mean, that's not like nail in the coffin type situation. I mean, just recently, I know that this is a bit random, but I mean, I watched the documentary on Woody Allen v. Farrow, if I remember correctly. I mean, Farrow's, one of her sons came out in support of Woody Allen. So it's, even though, like, as far as I could tell, there's like overwhelming and compelling evidence that Woody Allen was an abuser.
In public, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel for her because that's what an awful situation. Sam Altman is also into some kind of weirdo classic tech billionaire stuff that we've been talking about. He's a life extension guy.
Yep.
He was a seed investor in MiniCircle, which is a longevity biotech company with Peter Thiel that was focused on developing gene therapies to extend human lifespans. He's also a network state guy. He is an investor in both Prospera and Praxis. So Prospera, you may remember, is the place that we're talking about in Honduras, the special economic zone where like the crypto bros live and work. And then Praxis is this other startup that they want to build a city in the Mediterranean sometime in the next couple decades. And they also have made a pitch to buy Greenland, who is totally not interested in it. And,
no?
Yeah, so Thiel and Balaji Srinivasan, this is all kind of part of the network state movement that is becoming popular in Silicon Valley. He, in addition to being just like a weirdo in a business way and personally, he also has really weird politics. There was this video that came out where he was talking about how basically AI was going to eliminate lots of jobs, and so people would be living on universal basic income. He wrote a blog post about this and talked about how AI would be able to generate $13,500 in a yearly UBI, which is just like, okay, that's not going to be an amount that people are able to live on. And he's a land value tax believer, which I don't. Land value tax is this concept that the economist Henry George came up with, and it was sort of an alternative to Marxism, where the land would be taxed at its best and highest use, and then the profits would be sort of distributed to everyone. And a lot of people in Silicon Valley have gotten into this Georgia stuff, including Sam Altman. And I think that sometimes I'm not inherently opposed to taxing land value, but I do think that there is this motivation with Silicon Valley where, like, if you look at like who has enough money to develop skyscrapers, literal skyscrapers, who has the resources to do that, it's really just going to be like tech billionaires like you. For example, if you ever buy a house and it's just like the land value is assessed at like you have to pay a tax that's worth way more than the house, like the answer to that from their perspective is like, oh, you build a skyscraper there, but just like not everyone's capable of that. And so basically to me, this seems like some land value tax is fine, but this idea can also be used to like sort of justify only like the very wealthiest people owning land, which when paired with their interest in like these network state type movements does seem a little suspicious to me. It does seem like kind of a bid for a type of political control. So yeah, a couple other things he wrote in this blog post, Moore's Law for Everything. This technological revolution is unstoppable and a recursive loop of innovation. As these smart machines themselves help make us smarter machines, will accelerate the revolution's pace. There, to me, he sounds exactly like Mark Andreessen in the Techno-Optimist Manifesto.
I know some people in the community, the accelerationists, refer to the techno-capital singularity.
Yeah.
Others talk about techno-capital machine or acceleration and so on.
Yeah, so this is what Mark Andreessen says. He says, we believe the techno-capital machine of markets and innovation never ends, but instead spirals continuously upward. Like they both have this idea that basically it's just going to be like an upward spiral created by them, and it's just going to get more and more amazing. It's just going to get like exponentially more amazing, and it's going to be so fucking cool.
Yeah.
3 crucial consequences follow. He says, the revolution will create personal wealth, the price of many kinds of labor, which drives the cost of goods and services, will fall towards zero once sufficiently powerful AI joins the workforce. Okay, so I guess we'll only need $13,000 because everything will be free. The world will change so rapidly and drastically that an equally drastic change in policy will be needed to redistribute this wealth and enable more people to pursue the life they want. 3, if we get these things right, we can improve the standard of living for people more more than we ever have before. He says policy plans that don't account for this imminent transformation will fail for the same reason that the organizing principles of pre-agrarian or feudal societies would fail today. So basically, he really sees us on the verge of like a just completely new kind of economic system that would be sort of the same level of transformation from like feudalism to capitalism that Marx wrote about. But for Sam Altman, it's not the Marx idea of like capitalism to socialism. It's like capitalism to tech utopia.
Yeah.
It's very strange. Yeah.
This is so, I think what you just said is exactly right. I don't think the difference between our current state and the next epoch that we bring about as a result of AI is that difference between now and then is the same as the difference between where we are right now, capitalism and feudalism, right? Because they're talking about utopia. It's not like just the same increment of improvement. It's, Altman said in an interview when he was asked what's the best that could happen. And he literally said, well, like once you start talking about how good it can be, you begin to sound like a crazy person. Those are his words. So this is the sort of utopian eschatology, if you will, like view about the end of the world or the longer term future of humanity that is absolutely widespread in Silicon Valley. I mean, this is test realism. It's singularitarianism that he's talking about. We're going to create AI. It's going to rapidly and recursively self-improve. And the result is going to be this extraordinary acceleration of the rate of technological innovation. The amount of change that happened between today and 1925, that's going to happen in like a few seconds, every few seconds, right? So this is just a fundamental rupture in the fabric of human history.
It will be so embarrassing if these guys pull it off and there's just hours of me being recorded talking about what a fucking idiot they are and like how I just don't think that they're going to do it. Like if they do pull that off, I'll have to come clean and be like, guys, I'm sorry, I got that one wrong. But it's still, it's just seeming to me that that's kind of unlikely. Yeah.
I agree. There was actually a really good article, academic paper. So it's not very, I mean, even for a philosopher, it's pretty dense. But it was published just recently, written by a philosopher named David Thorstad, and it's titled Against the Singularity Hypothesis. I think it's one of the best critiques of this idea of AI rapidly self-improving itself. And one of the obvious constraints that would prevent this kind of really rapid acceleration of innovation in the future is energy, right? You need a ton of energy. I mean, we were talking just minutes ago about how much energy these large language models that are powering Gemini and ChatGPT and so on, how much energy they use. If we're talking about like a super intelligent AI, I think it's going to require just a lot of energy to actually bring about global scale economic change that smashes 100 or 1,000 years of progress into like a day. People say, oh, well, maybe we could just build a Dyson sphere, right? Some kind of mega structure that envelops the sun and harvests nearly all of the energy output of the sun.
These motherfuckers literally want to fly too close to the sun. It's like they're literalists about the Icarus myth.
I mean, the thing is, as Kate, I think we had an exchange on Twitter, aka X, not that long ago. I mean, there is not even enough material in the solar system to build a Dyson sphere, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Jupiter is tiny compared to the sun, right?
Yeah, and it's also like, even if we don't build a Dyson sphere, I mean, that's not going to happen. I don't even think I really fully understand what a Dyson sphere is, so I'm sure these men would be really sexist to me. But even if we're just going to use a lot of energy to do a normal amount of AI, not a revolutionary amount of AI, but just do AI. I mean, it takes so many minerals. Like, that's why these guys want their grubby little hands on Greenland. There's children forced into mining in Africa. Like, I noticed that there's never too much of a focus on like what's going to happen in the rest of the world when the U.S. achieves this alleged tech utopia. Like, are we going to continue mining and taking their resources and forcing people into, honestly, literal slavery in many cases? So it's not a vision of equality. I want to read just a little bit more about Sam Altman's ideal political economy. He gets to it right up top in the same essay, and this section is called Part 3, Capitalism for Everyone. All right, so there's just really no confusion there. Does he like socialism? No, he doesn't. A stable economic system requires two components, growth and inclusivity. Economic growth matters because most people want their lives to improve every year. fair. In a zero-sum world, one with no or very little growth, democracy can become antagonistic as people seek to vote money away from each other. I thought that part was funny. He's like, don't take my money. What follows from that antagonism is distrust and polarization. I mean, this is just so self-serving. In a high-growth world, the dogfights can be far fewer because it's easier for everyone to win. So yeah, this is basically like Ezra Klein's abundance. It's that same Silicon Valley mentality. Economic inclusivity means everyone having a reasonable opportunity to get the resources they need to live the life they want. Economic inclusivity matters because it's fair, it produces a stable society, and creates the largest slices of pie for most people. As a side benefit, it produces more growth. Capitalism is a powerful engine of economic growth because it rewards people for investing in assets that generate value over time, which is an effective incentive structure for creating and distributing technological gains. Price of progress in capitalism is inequality. Oh shit, Sam, are you kidding? What? Some inequality is okay. In fact, it's critical. As shown by all systems that have tried to be perfectly equal. But a society that does not offer sufficient equality of opportunity for everyone to advance is not a society that will last. The traditional way to increase inequality has been by taxing income. Sam, are you about to say something about how you don't want to pay your taxes? Well, I bet you are. For a variety of reasons, that hasn't worked very well. It will work much, much worse in the future. Well, people still have jobs. Many of those
Does
jobs
he say that?
Yeah. Well, people still have jobs.
Oh my
Many of
God.
those jobs won't be the ones that create a lot of economic value in the way we think of value today. As it produces most of the world's basic goods and services, people will be freed up to spend more time with people they care about, care for people, appreciate art and nature, work towards social good. That's fine. The chilling out part is fine. We should focus on taxing capital rather than labor. We should use these taxes as an opportunity to distribute ownership and wealth to citizens. So I'm going to skip ahead, but basically I want to read you just really briefly his plan for distributing the wealth. We could do something called the American Equity Fund. The American Equity Funds would be capitalized by taxing companies above a certain valuation, 2.5% of their market value each year, payable in shares transferred to the funds, and by taxing 2.5% of the value of all privately held land in dollars. All citizens over 18 would get an annual distribution in dollars and company shares into their account. People would be entrusted to use the money however they wanted or needed for better education, healthcare, housing, starting a company, whatever. Rising costs in government-funded industries would face real pressure as people begin to choose their own services in a competitive marketplace. As long as the country keeps doing better, every citizen would get more money from the fund every year. Every citizen would therefore increasingly partake of the freedoms, powers, autonomy, and opportunity that comes with economic self-determination. Poverty will be greatly reduced and many more people will have a shot at the life that they want. So he's saying no social safety net that's set. We're not going to have Medicare and Medicaid. People are going to have, they'll choose how they want to spend their money. And notably, we're not going to necessarily, we'll have some money, but mostly what we're going to have is shares in OpenAI. So that our future will be tied to him making a lot of money. So it does sound like sort of a type of libertarianism. I mean, there's a minimal state there. But his plan for like the future of humanity is just that we all become little mini venture capitalists, and that's what we have instead of healthcare. And to me, that just seemed very obnoxious. Yeah.
Obnoxious is one way to put it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so self-serving.
Talked about before, like their vision of utopia that drives a lot of these people is or would be a dystopia to most people. Like you said, I mean, it's one of the reasons that some AI ethicists get really frustrated with people like Altman is sometimes they use the language, at least to some extent, of social justice in making their art. You know, OpenAI is about benefiting all of humanity and references inclusivity at some point in what you read. And really, like, is their view actually inclusive?
No.
Is it really going to benefit all of humanity or just a segment of humanity?
I mean, it'll benefit some way more than others, right? Like, let's steel man his position and say that this all works out exactly how he has outlined it. Poverty is greatly reduced. We all have more free time. That's good. Okay. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen, but let's imagine that it did.
Yeah.
So Sam Altman and his friends own all the lands. We don't have labor power anymore for the most part. So we can't can't affect things by forming a union and striking. And our money, like our ability to live, is tied to the profits of his company, right? So it's like we don't even need, like, there's no use for a president in that scenario, or for like democracy, elected officials, anything like that. Like, it's just, hey, there's this guy who is both our landlord and our provider daddy, and like, I mean, there's no political power for people in that scenario.
This is because we'd have superintelligence that would govern. I mean, this is an idea that actually has a term, which is algocracy, rule by algorithm. And
I'm sorry, I didn't make that face at you. It was the idea.
I mean, there are people in like the general TESCREL, like EA, long-termist and so on communities, out of which Altman kind of emerged, who take this idea seriously. I mean, some are also concerned, but ultimately the grand vision is to pass off the existential baton to some kind of post-human beings. And almost certainly those post-human beings are going to be AI, some form of digital entity, digital intelligence. And so once we hand the baton off to them, they're going to rule the world. And so that will be...
where you at, my man? Where you at?
I think Luigi is kind of TESCREL-less.
Yeah. I learned that. I was doing a little research and I found out that Luigi's a TESCREL bro.
Yeah.
I was so upset. It was devastating. But he still did what he did. We must not judge people on the basis of one thing.
Are you utilitarian about that situation?
No, I'm a comedian about that situation. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Perfect answer.
Yeah. So, the last thing that we want to make sure to get into today is that Sam Altman is a believer in the simulation hypothesis. So, I know we talked about that a little bit with Elon Musk and Nick Bostrom, but what does the simulation hypothesis mean?
Yeah. Good question. I mean, this idea has been around for a while. Among a very particular group of people, it gained a kind of credibility with the publication in 2003 of Do We Live in a Computer Simulation? I think that's what it's titled, something like that, by Nick Bostrom. And so Bostrom proposes what he calls the simulation argument, which is different from the simulation hypothesis. The simulation hypothesis is a part of the simulation argument, but it's different. And so basically Bostrom makes the claim that at least one of three things it must obtain in the future. One is that we go extinct before reaching a post-human phase of existence. So in other words, like in the near term. The other is that we do evolve into or create a post-human civilization, but for some reason that we can't really divine right now, we decide not to run simulations full of digital beings that are conscious.
Okay.
So that's the second prong. That's the second possibility, the second disjunct, as it were. And then the third one is that we're almost certainly living in a computer simulation. So one of those three things has to be true, at least. And so the third disjunct, the third possibility, that corresponds to the simulation hypothesis. And the reasoning there is that if we develop into a post-human civilization and we decide to run simulations of our past, so he calls these ancestral simulations. So these are, imagine post-humans in the future, they're just like curious about like our evolutionary history. So like, okay, let's rewind the tape of anthropological history to, about 200, 300,000 years before we are right now, because that's when our species first emerged. And so they rewind the tape and run the simulation over and over again. You could run a huge number of these simulations in a short period of time. Consequently, the total number of beings that are digital, beings that are conscious but are digital in nature, could vastly exceed the total number of beings that are not digital, that are actually biological.
Wait, so we may have already made the super AI.
Exactly. So we could be in one of those simulations. And so then his claim is that, okay, imagine that we become this post-human civilization, we run all these simulations. Then what you need to do is use this thing called the principle of indifference. And the principle of indifference, it's very simple. All it says is that when you don't have a particular reason for selecting one option over the others, you should distribute the probabilities evenly, right? So if you're not sure if it's A or B, if you have no information about whether or not it's A or B, you go, okay, let's just say it's 50-50 chance, right? If it's A, B, and C, you go, okay, we'll say it's 1/3 chance probability that either of these obtains. So he says if you just apply the principle of indifference to the fact that there would be in this scenario way more digital beings than biological beings, you are almost certainly a digital being right now, right? So in other words, if you had to like place a bet, most people who bet that they're digital beings would win. And most people who bet that they're biological beings would lose. And so that is the simulation hypothesis that we're actually in the simulation right now. That makes sense?
Kind of. So what I'm getting is they leave no room in any of these possibilities for the fact that we might just be humans on Earth. That's not even under consideration.
So we could be humans on Earth that end up going extinct soon.
Oh, okay, so humans on Earth that go extinct, yes.
Yeah, so that's one way that this scenario where we run a bunch of simulations wouldn't happen. Another scenario where we don't run a whole bunch of simulations in the future is the second possibility. That yes, we become post-human, but for some reason, like maybe they're ethical reasons, but post-humans in the future say, no, we shouldn't run any ancestral simulations at all, right? But if neither of those are true, if we don't go extinct, and if we do evolve into a post-human species that does not have some kind of moral objection to running simulations, then we're going to become post-humans that run a bunch of simulations. And if we do that, then the odds are that we're in a computer simulation.
But so there's no option where the human species continues for quite some time, where we're just humans, but people just continue to be people for many, many years into the future. They haven't considered that possibility at all.
Not really. And also, I think there are some obvious errors in the simulation argument. In fact, not long after Bostrom published that paper, he published a second paper, which I think was co-authored with someone, which acknowledged that there were actual mathematical problems in their argument. And they tried to patch it up. I don't know exactly how they succeeded, but also that, I think a lot of listeners might be thinking, because this is the obvious objection, if we become post-humans in the future and we run all of these ancestral simulations of the human species, then how does the principle of indifference actually apply? Because the principle of indifference is only applicable when you don't have other information about who you are, or about which option is true. If we become that post-human civilization, we will know for sure that we're the ones running the simulations. We know that. You don't run a simulation and then go oh, am I in that simulation? No, the simulation is separate, something you've done. And so we may ultimately produce trillions and trillions of digital people in the future, but we will know that we're not one of those digital beings. So does that make sense? So there's just this sort of obvious, how does it make sense that this future possibility that we become post-human implies that we're right now simulated?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is just this is guys being too obsessed with AI. They're just I think it's very possible that our future doesn't just not really have that much to do with becoming digital beings or any of that shit. I mean, there's no evidence that they can read this stuff. They have really cool LLMs. I had proofread a paper in ChatGPT the other day that was really useful. It could tell me where all my spaces were and stuff. But that's just nothing. That's nothing like being able to upload human consciousness to the cloud. It's not the same ballpark. It's not the same technology. It's not there's just no proof that we can do this stuff. That's an even doable thing or whatever. And I'm not trying to sound like the sort of Wright brothers here, but I think that there is sort of I think that there might be something sort of fundamentally human that isn't possible to recreate in a machine.
So this is one of the assumptions that the simulation argument makes, is that digital consciousness is possible. It might not be. Maybe consciousness is just the result of information being processed in a particular way. So maybe what matters to what is important, what is necessary to generate consciousness is just a system that has the right functional organization. Maybe that's the case, but maybe not. Because if it's just functional organization that matters, then you could theoretically at least scan the brain and then simulate the brain on a computer and reproduce the consciousness. But maybe that's not. No, that's fine. Maybe that's not true. Maybe there's something else. There's something about the biological substrate that is necessary to produce consciousness. That is entirely possible. And if that's the case, then the whole simulation argument just falls apart.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I'm not trying to insult the discipline of philosophy. I know it's a really interesting field, but I do...
Careful.
No, I think you'll agree with this.
Yes.
It does seem like there are people who can sort of use it to sort of decide this weird thing that they want to make an argument for, and then work backwards in a series of sort of if-then arguments that don't really make that much sense, where they're okay, you just made up a little fantasy of what you want the world to be like, and then you found a way to sort of math logic your way to that. And that's what this simulation theory sounds like to me.
I don't think you're totally wrong. I mean, in my my defense as a philosopher, there are a lot of philosophers who find the simulation argument to be like nonsense or flawed.
I bet. Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm frankly kind of surprised that it got published. I even asked a bunch of effective altruists, many of whom like are really into the simulation hypothesis, how the paper got published, given that like there are, as far as I could tell, some obvious problems with it. And pretty much all of them were like, yeah, I don't really know. I don't know how it got past peer review. Some philosophy is terrible.
So we've been podcasting for a minute, so we should wrap up. But this is a very interesting discussion about Sam Altman and his horrible little land value tax UBI world eyeball scanning situation.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just sort of tying the simulation hypothesis back to Altman. And I think I mentioned this on a previous podcast, but he was one of 25 people who in 2018 signed up with this startup called Nectome to have his brain preserved if he were to die prematurely. And the service that Nectome offers is to digitize preserved brains. So if you sign up, you get your brain preserved. Or if you have some kind of terminal illness, then there's a California law that would allow doctors to essentially euthanize you. And so if you're signed up with Nectome, then doctors would euthanize you. Nectome would then preserve the brain so it can be digitized.
In the future.
In the future. And Altman has said explicitly in this article, in the MIT Technology Review, that he thinks our brains will be digitized within his lifetime. So this idea of the simulation, whether or not the simulation argument itself is true, becoming a digital being and living in a simulated world, that is very much part of the utopian eschatology, this sort of digital eschatology that all of these people, including Sam Altman, accepts.
Very, very odd, guys. Seems like it's like just one of those things where they're in their little social group and they're all talking about simulations and AI and race science, and it's like you need to be friends with a nurse. Like you need to just be friends with somebody, with a poet, somebody normal. Like who could just be like, wow, that's really disturbing. Yeah. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But they're just only talking to people that are like that. I do want to thank our Patreon subscribers.
Thanks.
We'll be back very soon. Thank you so much.
Hang in there.
Dystopia Now is a co-production of Emil Torres and Kate Willett. Our theme song is Hunger Strike by Emil Torres. We have no outside funding or advertising, so if you can become a contributor on Patreon, we deeply appreciate your help keeping the show going. We are a brand new podcast, so please rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice, and we'd love your help getting the word out. Thank you so much.